All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So we've got this webinar scheduled here until 2:30 today. I don't think that my presentation will take the full hour, so hopefully there will be plenty of time at the end for questions. We'll also pause for questions at appropriate times within the presentation to make sure that we've addressed any questions that have come up to that point. Everyone is currently muted on their lines. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to type those into the question box. My colleague Kevin Knase is here managing that. And I'm Ruth DuBose, Program Manager here over the Homeownership Capacity Program. And we'll go ahead and get started talking about monitoring. So today we will cover the 5 W's of monitoring: why, who, what, when, where, and where. And we'll also be reviewing a sample file submission, and then we'll be talking about next steps and helpful tips to making sure that you've got a good, complete submission. So Minnesota Housing is required to monitor all of our grants on an annual basis. This is under the Office of Grants Management Policy 08-10. We are also monitoring because it's a new program. So this is an opportunity for us to see strengths and weaknesses of the program design and result in possible program changes as a result of that monitoring. We will be monitoring all agencies that receive homeownership capacity funds or direct appropriation funds. As part of our monitoring process, we will be pulling a couple of items from you. First of all, we'll be pulling your financials. We'll be looking at your general ledgers, and we'll be doing some expense testing. And then we'll be pulling the 4 different client file types, with that being intake, annual data, program completion and outcome clients, and then those that were coded as client stop communication. Of course, we'll start with a select number of files, but we always have the right to request additional documentation beyond what's listed here and in the subsequent slides. We'll start by talking about the financials. We'll be doing the collection of the financial data in 2 different phases. The first phase, we'll be taking a look at the general ledger, and we'll be collecting that at the time that we're requesting the client files. And then once we've received the general ledger, we will be selecting at least 1 item for expense testing. And we'll be following up via email with a request for supporting documentation, the process, and the due date for the submission of that information. Just a couple submission tips with the general ledger. We will have a required cover sheet that we'll have you use for submitting your general ledger. Make sure that your submission clearly identifies that the funds represented are for homeownership capacity only. So a reminder, that is part of a requirement in the grant agreement, is that you do separate tracking of the incoming and outgoing of the homeownership capacity funds, and that being separate from all of your other programs that you're receiving, or funding sources that you're receiving money from. So again, that could be by name, identified at the top of the general ledger, or if there's a specific code that you use. And we do ask that you identify that, you know, especially if you're using a specific code, that you make those notations on your general ledger before submitting them to reduce the number of questions that we may have for clarification. With expense testing, we will ask that you include all the required supporting documentation requested for expense testing of that item selected. Partial submissions may result in a finding and potentially a recapture of funds if we don't have the supporting documentation that we need to test that expense out. So on this slide and the next slide, we do have some typical items that we will pull supporting documentation for. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. So if there is an item that is selected that's not included on this list, we'll be sure to provide some additional information about what specifically should be provided to support that. With most of these items, in addition to the supporting documentation that's listed in the right-hand column, we'll also be requesting the payment documentation and the invoice with that item. So if we select a marketing material item from your general ledger, we will ask for the brochure sample. That just tells us that that item was in fact connected to your homeownership capacity outreach or financial wellness outreach. Again, then we would also ask for documentation that the payment was made, and then the invoice. So we've got kind of the start to finish of that transaction. If we select a training item that's listed on the general ledger, we would want some additional course document information. So some examples of that would be the agenda, a flyer from that training, and again, just to check and make sure that that is in fact connected to financial wellness, one-on-one coaching and or education trainings. And again, of course, same payment documentation and invoice. For travel expenses, so if it's for mileage, we'd like the mileage documentation. So whatever is used to track mileage for that staff person, and then documentation of the reimbursement rate. So again, we'd be taking the mileage, multiplying that by the reimbursement rate, and we should see that total match up with the amount listed on the general ledger. Next up would be class materials. So that would be for potentially supplies or snacks for classes. So really for that, we'd just be looking for the receipt for that item. Credit report fees. So if we do select that item, we will be asking for a list of clients that were paid for with homeownership capacity funds. So if you had a charge for $100 on your homeownership capacity general ledger, we'd be looking to see that the clients, a list of clients and the amounts of those credit reports total $100. And we'd be checking the clients listed against the homeownership capacity clients. I know staff salary is a large expense item for programs such as these. So for staff salary, for hourly employees, we'd be looking for the timesheet for the time period selected and the employee hourly rate. So some sort of official documentation from your agency identifying the hourly rate of pay for that employee. For salaried employees, we'd be looking at their annual salary. So again, some sort of official documentation identifying what that salary is, and then demonstration of how it was determined that the amount of homeownership capacity funds that would be paid towards that employee's salary. And a lot of times that's something that says, this salaried employee either tracks their time through a time card or, maybe through past tracking, you've determined a percentage and have applied that to current and future pay dates. And then, of course, as I said before, if there's other items that aren't a part of this list, but that we do select, we will provide additional information at the time of the request of what we're looking for. And again, if you have, if you've got your accountant on the line, this is going to be very similar to what they're used to going through. So this process shouldn't be too new or different from kind of just standard practice. So with the financials, and I've already kind of talked a little bit about this, with the first phase of looking over the general ledger, we're really looking to make sure that that is specific to the Homeownership Capacity Program. So again, either a title on top of the general ledger or identifying that the code that's listed on that general ledger is specific for homeownership capacity. And then we'll really be looking to see, are the expenses that are listed eligible under the Homeownership Capacity Program? And again, just a reminder that the list of eligible expenses under the program are included in the grant agreement. And then as part of that second phase, we'll be looking to see, first, does the organization have the requested documentation to support the expense? And do the expenses referenced in the general ledger match the supporting documentation provided? I'll pause for just a second to see if there are any questions. And just a reminder that with questions, you are welcome to enter those into the question box. And there's a question about if this PowerPoint will be available after the training. So this PowerPoint was emailed out to everyone that's on this call. After the call today, we will be posting the recorded version as well as the PowerPoint and the cover sheets and the sample client files that I'm about to go through. Okay, it sounds like there's some difficulties with logging in to this call, and
so I got an email from Henry. Sorry.
All right, we're going to go ahead and keep moving on. So I apologize. We are working to troubleshoot that issue. So we'll hopefully have that corrected here shortly. But again, this will be recorded and posted to our website after the call for those that weren't able to access the link. Another question here in the question box is, so the monies are only available if the participants are doing homeownership and not financial capability. So these funds are for anyone that's participating or for any client that has been reported under homeownership capacity and is participating in the program in that way. So again, if you are providing an education, so maybe a classroom education, and you're coding the clients that are in that course, assuming that it is for financial capability, you're coding those clients to homeownership capacity. You are welcome to use homeownership capacity funds to pay for rent if you have to rent out a facility for that class. You're welcome to use the funds to pay for supplies for the class, whether it be office types of supplies, binders, printing. You're also welcome to use those funds to pay for items such as snacks. If you pay for things like snacks for those courses as well. I hope that answers the question. Certainly, if there's other more specific questions, feel free to reach out to us either after the call or once you've received your monitoring request letter, and we can talk more about that. Another question is, what period of time does this cover? That's a really great question. So the period of time will be on the financials. If your organization was funded under the 15-16 year, it will be the financials from that year. If your organization was started receiving funds in the 16-17 year, so the year that we're currently under, it would be during that time frame only. So then it would start October 1st to I think think we're requesting through the end of February on the financials for those organizations. Regarding the client files, it will be for clients that had activity in the 16-17 program year. So for clients that were either new into the program as of October 1st or had activity, either follow-up or completion, whatever the case may be in this current program year. Another question is there a format that you prefer to get the general ledger in, Excel or PDF? Good question. Either format is just fine. Yeah, either format is just fine. I think the main thing is that we're able, of course, to see all the information that's listed in the general ledger, and that, again, it's clear that it is, in fact, for homeownership capacity. All right, we're going to keep moving along here. I haven't heard anything else yet about the link, so I do apologize on that. But we'll go ahead here and take a look now at client files. All right. So for client files, we will be selecting up to 3 client files from each of the following data entry points: annual, intake, and then program completion and outcome. We're merging those into one. And then at least one client will be selected from client.communication. And we will go through samples of what the submissions should look like in terms of how to assemble that information here shortly. So as I shared, there will be cover sheets that will be provided for each data set. These must be used to separate the different documents provided to support your submission. It will help for 2 reasons. One, you will be able to better organize your submission on your end and making sure that you're only pulling in the necessary documents. And hopefully it'll be really clear to you exactly what you need to provide. And then on our end, it will make our review process much smoother, knowing that that is, in fact, the only document that is connected to that item that we're looking at. One really, really important piece to emphasize here is to only provide the documentation requested for that data collection point. So you may have a client that was selected and they were selected under the program completion category. So of course you would have intake data on them. You might have annual data. If they are listed, if that client name is listed under program completion, only provide that information. Only provide the program completion information. And vice versa. So if you've got someone that has gone all the way through program completion, but we've selected that client at intake, only provide their intake information. Don't include multiple budgets to support each data collection point. So you wouldn't want to include intake and annual data and program completion. You would only include the documentation that you collected at intake and reported at intake. So we'll go through this a little bit quickly here because, again, we do have some client file samples to look at. So client files at intake, we will be providing cover sheets again, and there'll be a cover sheet for each of the items listed here on the PowerPoint. So any documentation to support the reported data. So again, you'll have, at intake, you'll likely have an intake form and you'll have a budget. So that would go behind that first cover sheet. Then you'd have a credit report. So again, that is what you've used to report the credit score and the different balances. So you'd only be providing the credit report, again, that you pulled at intake. Then we're looking to see that you've got the signed coaching agreement and disclosure form in the file, and that you also have the Combined Privacy Act notice and tenancy warning in the file. And then as a requirement under intake, that you'll be providing the action plan that you created for that client and with that client, and then your case notes. Moving on to annual. So again, we'll be providing cover sheets. At this stage, you'll be providing the supporting documentation to support the data that you reported. So for this stage, again, you've already done the intake. At annual, it's just going to be really the budget. And then at each of these stages, we do ask that you provide the coaching agreement and disclosure form and the Combined Privacy Act notice and tenancy warning. The reason for that is because those really are the client agreeing to having that information submitted to Minnesota Housing. So we want to make sure that you've got that in your file for each of these clients that are selected. As you'll see in your request letter, the same client isn't going to show up twice. So you won't have a client that was selected at intake, and then you'll also have to provide their annual data. So again, we want to make sure that for every file that we're looking at, that client has agreed to having their information shared with us. And then you'll include the credit report that you pulled at that annual check-in, and then you'll also include your case notes, any case notes that you have. I know that some of you now have been part of the program long enough that you've had maybe 2 annual check-ins with the client. This is going to be for the first annual check-in after intake that you'll be providing that data for. Next up would be the program completion and outcomes. So again, the supporting documentation for items that were reported at program completion would be the same. You'd include the budget. Of course, we have the 2 required forms and the credit report. And then some additional documentation that you only would have in the file at program completion or outcome would be the action plan that you completed with that client at program completion, your client survey. Again, that would be something that the client would complete at program completion or after. And then the outcome data form if an outcome was reported, and then your case notes. And for client stop communication, again, we're looking for the 2 required forms and then your case notes. And really with your case notes, really what we're looking for is just that you've demonstrated that you've made those 2 attempts within a month to reach the client prior to coding them as stop communication. So for client files, a few things that the reviewer will be looking at. So first they're going to be looking at, are all those required documents at part of the file? So again, that's going to be specifically that coaching agreement and disclosure form, including any conflicts that exist, and then that Combined Privacy Act notice and tenancy warning. One thing that we noticed quite a bit when we were monitoring last time was that these forms were signed and dated after the date that these clients were reported to Minnesota Housing. So we're really looking to make sure that those are in fact signed and dated before anything was reported to us. Next up, we'll be looking to see does the client progress report, or excuse me, the information now in the data collection system, does that match up against the data that's in the client file? So do those match? So again, if you're pulling a credit report to include, and that's the credit score is different than the one that was reported, make sure that you're including the one that matches the date or the number that you reported. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the quality of the services provided. So specifically, we'll be looking at the case notes and the action plan to assess the quality of the coaching. In this case, the reviewer is to consider if there were opportunities for additional education and coaching that could have been provided to the client. So for one example, the client had collection accounts, but no discussion notated in the case notes as to why they had collections accounts and what steps are needed to avoid in the future. So before I move on to the timeline, it looks like we've got a couple questions here in the question box, so take a look at those now. So the first question is, I'm unclear on the forms, the privacy notice, et cetera. Do we have to ask the client to sign all the forms at intake and all the other times? So it's a good question. No, you don't have to ask them to sign it at each point. It's what you're providing in your annual submission, in your completion submission, and in the client stop communication submission is the form that you collected from the client at intake. So that's the only time that you're going to need to collect that information, and then again provide that form for any of those subsequent submissions. And Kevin has been able to figure out what's happening with the system, so he'll share a quick update on that.
I don't know if I go that far, unfortunately. So it sounds like we have a couple individuals that aren't actually able to see the webinar itself. So I just tried to log in myself and did run into an issue where I had to actually try and do the restart download, and then doing that did fix the issue. Sometimes computers and systems have permissions that may or may not allow you to download certain, I guess, software to run the webinar. So it may be something that could unfortunately be on your network end as well. If you're not able to restart the download and then view the recording with the link, then I'd recommend following the PowerPoint that Ruth sent out, and then we will have this recording posted to our website as well as the PDF as well, if you'd like to follow along and just kind of review after the webinar itself. But I do apologize about the technical difficulty.
Thank you. So I don't see any other questions in the question box, so we'll go ahead and move on to the monitoring timeline. Excuse me, there is one other question that just came through. It says case notes. Will we be providing you the complete case notes or the case notes covering a specific period? I would say whatever is easiest for you. If you're able, you know, so say the client that was requested, you've got intake through program completion, but if it's easiest, but they were selected at intake, if it's easiest for you to just provide the entire list of case notes, that's just fine. Really, what the case notes we're using is to really get a sense of more of that client story as we're looking at those files. So, but if it is easier for you to just pull the intake case notes, that's fine too. Let's see. So the next question is, so once we have it on the file from the initial meeting intake, we should be good. You don't need a file for intake, another for annual audit, another for completion, just one file. So I hope I'm understanding this question correctly here. So if we selected a client, say we collected John Doe, which is the example in our case or in our samples here, selected that client at intake. So each of your letters are going to say, provide us the intake data on these clients, provide us the annual data on these clients, provide us the, or not the data, but the documentation, provide us the program completion data on these clients. So when you're going into your file, if that client was selected for intake, but maybe they've worked with you through your entire program to program completion, all you have to provide for that client is the intake documentation if they're in that intake, if they're listed under the intake section of your monitoring letter. If they're selected, if they're listed under the program completion, all you have to provide is that supporting documentation of what you reported at program completion. So of course you'll have intake data on that client, you know, you'll probably have an intake form, you'll have the credit report that you pulled at intake. You won't need to provide any of that. It's really just the information that you pulled at program completion. I hope that clarifies. If not, though, please don't hesitate to reach out. So the next question is, when will the 3 client files are selected from each of the data entry points, when will that take place? So we'll be going over that next here with the timeline, so we'll get to that here in just a minute. And then the next question about the general ledger, we'll go over that in a little bit more detail here now with talking about the timeline. So this Friday, the monitoring letters will be emailed out to the executive director and the program manager. You will have until March 17th to submit everything to LeapFile. And again, that will be the general ledger and the client files. And then what we'll be doing, that I think March 17th is a Friday, what we'll be doing early that following week is looking over the general ledgers and making those expense testing selections. And we will get those out to you by the end of that week. And then you'll have 10 days after the date of your request to submit that expense testing item. And again, like I said, it will start with just one item that will be selected. So, you know, if you have, you know, a purchase of brochures, and, you know, if you've got that listed as $200 on your general ledger, you might select that item, and you would just have to provide supporting documentation for just that one item. And then any follow-up, we hope to have the monitoring completed here by mid to late April, and then after that we'll be doing any follow-up on any issues that are identified, and we'll be issuing the letters. We'll share that you will be submitting your monitoring documentation before we release the Homeownership Capacity application. That will be released on March 27th. So we'll be doing our reviews while you'll be working on your applications if you choose to submit your application for the next year of funding. So with monitoring, the first phase of this will occur remotely. Of course, we do reserve the right to make on-site visits if necessary, but this first phase will really be conducted as a desk review. And all the requested documents, we'll just be asking you to submit those via LeapFile. LeapFile is the only secure way that that you can submit documentation to us. Doing it through regular email is not a secured way to transfer information to us. So we do ask that you submit it to LeapFile. Additionally, LeapFile does give us quite a bit more capacity to have it just be in one submission. I think with email we have far less room to have attachments be submitted all in one email. Whereas LeapFile, you can submit everything in most cases with just one email, even if there's multiple documents that are larger in size. So what we do ask is that, and again, this will make your submissions much cleaner, and it will make our review process far easier if you are able to follow these naming suggester naming conventions when you're naming your each of your documents. So for each of your client files, we ask that you put your name and then the client's last name and first name, and then that it is an intake file. We ask that you follow that same convention with annual client files, program completion files, and then client stop communication. And then, of course, with your general ledger, we just ask that you title it with your agency name and then general ledger. That will help us with sorting and saving once we get it on our end, and then pulling it back up again to review it at a later time when we're going through those reviews. Just pause and see if we've got any other questions before I go through some sample client files. So the question is, are we going to have an on-site visit also? So again, we'll be doing the first phase of monitoring remotely, and then if there is significant enough concerns, we will be doing an on-site visit. I will say, you know, when we've done monitoring in the past, in most cases that hasn't been necessary, but again, we do reserve the right to do that if we do find a need for it. All right. right. So let's take a look now at some sample client files. All right. So this is the cover sheet that will be provided, and again, these are all posted on our website. I'll show you where they're located here before we hang up. So this form is fillable. Again, this is the one that you would use for all of your client intake data that you're submitting. So you're going to be entering your name, your organization name, and then the client name here. And then each cover sheet gives you some additional cues about what else you should be including as part of the documents that are behind that cover sheet. So again, at intake, you're going to be including your intake form and your budget that you completed with that client only at intake. So make sure that what you are submitting includes the client name, the date that data was collected, rent, savings, and household income. So you want to make sure that those 5 items are included in the documentation that you provide. What you see here is a sample of the client intake form. This form is not required for you to use, as we talked about at the kickoff event. So this is really for demonstration purposes. Whatever you use within your agency is fine to submit. If you don't have a paper file, but you have an electronic file only on that client, feel free to just print out screenshots of this data that you have in your systems. So in this sample here, we've got the client budget. So we've got the client's name, the date that the information was collected. We've got the gross pay for the client, the rent payment, and then the amount in savings. And again, those would be the 5 reported items that we are looking at reconciling against what you reported in the system compared to what you have in the client file. So with the intake, the credit report, that was pulled at intake, we're looking to make sure that you have the client name, the dates that the report was pulled, the credit score, and then that the credit report shows the balances for these 4 different reporting categories. We don't have a sample credit report, but again, this is what we'd be looking for. If you reported a credit score of 571 on that client, we'd be looking to see that that the credit report in the file that you provided has that same credit score, for example. And I will say it's not required, but it is certainly helpful if you can circle where these items are located in the file. So again, it's not required, but if it's not really obvious by just looking at the file, it would be helpful if you can circle those items. So again, this is the required coaching agreement disclosure form. So this is one of the 4 forms that are required under the Homeownership Capacity Program. So we'll be looking to see, do you in fact have this form completed and signed by the client? So you'll see here, got the agency that's listed their services, they've identified their conflicts, and they've got the client signature. The next required form is the Combined Privacy Act notice and Tennyson warning. So again, we've got the client name at the top, and then the client signature at the bottom. Reminder then that we do, as a part of the requirements under the program, that you can complete an action plan with the client at intake. So we have a cover sheet for that, and then behind that we ask that you put your action plan. Again, this action plan that's in this file is a template. We don't require that you use the action plan that we have available to you. If you have a different format that you use for client files for your action plan, you're certainly welcome to use those and certainly provide those as part of your submission. And then finally, your case notes. In this sample, it's really just the activity that took place with the client from their time at intake to a few months after the visit. But again, it's certainly fine if it's easier to pull all the case notes. Even if that client has worked with you beyond intake, it is certainly fine to provide all of that. But really, at a minimum, we're just looking for your case notes at intake. Take a look next at the a sample client file of the with annual data. So again, the cover sheet looks the same. We've got the coaching agreement and disclosure form that was signed by the client at their intake. Got the Combined Privacy Act notice and Tennyson warning again that was signed at intake. So this would be the budget that was created with that client at that annual appointment. And again, you're pulling in, you want to make sure that what the documentation that you provide includes the client name, the date that the data was collected, the amount that they're paying in rent, the amount that they have in savings, and their household income. So in this sample, you can see that, of course, we've got the client name, we've got that annual follow-up date there, and then we've got those two fields on this first sheet, and then that third field on that second sheet. The credit report, again, you're going to be providing the credit report that was provided at that first annual follow-up with the client. And again, it's going to be the same items. You want to make sure that the credit report shows the same items that it would have shown at intake, except that you're just providing the one that was pulled for that client at that first annual check-in. So again, just a reminder, if you reported a credit score of 629 at that annual follow-up, we want to make sure that you're providing that credit report that supports that credit score of 629. And then the case notes. So just a reminder, there is no requirement to do an action plan at that annual. If you have done an action plan, that's fine. Certainly, you do not need to provide that for the purposes of monitoring. We're again just asking for those required the documents that support the items that you reported to the agency, and of course then ensuring that you've got the two required forms signed by that client. Next up, we'll take a look at the program completion and outcome data. So again, you've got the coaching agreement and disclosure form that was signed by the client, at intake. You've got the Combined Privacy Act notice and Tennyson warning again that was signed at intake. Here you're going to be providing the program completion budget that you created with that client at the time that they reached program completion. So again, in this case, we've got John Doe a year after, in this case, that annual follow-up. That's when John completed the program. You've got, again, wages and the rent payment, and then the savings amount. And then you've got the credit report that you pulled at program completion. Again, it's showing all of the same items that you would have shown at the annual or at the intake. Again, it's just what you collected at program completion for that client. And then as a reminder, you are required at program completion to complete an action plan with that client, because really this is the time that you're making that referral to homebuyer education and counseling. And so you want to kind of summarize the next steps for the client, including that referral. So you've got the action plan that you completed at program completion with that client. Again, this is a template. It's not required that you use this either at intake or at program completion. It is an option if you don't have something else available or if you would prefer to use this. I've shared about 2 of the required forms now, the coaching agreement and disclosure form and the Combined Privacy Act notice and tenancy warning. The program completion client survey is the 3rd form that is required for use under the program. So here we've got John's program completion client survey that he went through. So again, these responses should match up with what you have reported in the data collection system. And then if you reported an outcome in the system, we are looking to see that you have this form in the file, and this is the 4th required form that is required under the program. And as a reminder, you know, in collecting the data for the outcome, you're picking one of these 3 options as that client's outcome. And then finally, your case notes. And then the last is client stop communication. This one's pretty straightforward. Again, you're providing the 2 required forms that the client signs at intake. Again, just showing to us that that client is in fact okay with their information being shared with Minnesota Housing. And then you're providing just your case notes. So in this example, we've got the documentation that the 2 follow-ups were made before that file was closed. So are there any questions at this point? So one question's come in. Is it okay if we have been using a different sheet when completing information regarding home purchase? So I believe, and I need to confirm, but I'm fairly certain that we require the outcome data collection form, that we do require that be used and is in the file for under the Homeownership Capacity Program. If you've been doing something consistently that's different than that, let's talk about it offline and try to figure out a solution to that. So what I want to do is just take you quickly here onto where you will submit the documentation via LEAP file. So we're on our web page here. Actually, I'll show you first where all these forms can be found. So we've got our community development section on our website, and then in other community development programs, you'll scroll down to current providers. Click on program information and forms. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a monitoring section here. We will, when we send the letters out, we will include the cover sheets, the fillable form cover sheets. I will also be posting these 4 client file samples on our web page. You've got the PowerPoint here, and then the webinar will be posted here after the call. And I'll send out an email once all of that stuff is live. So to back up, when you're on our home page, in the partner login section, there's the single family secure file exchange. So if you click on that and you click on secure upload, you should be able to go in and submit the documents that way. I tried this just before the call today, and I was having some problems with it, which is not common for us. So I'm going to try it again now. But you'll be sending this information to the Homeownership Capacity, the general inbox. Yeah, I apologize. We are still having problems with that. But once, I think the most important piece is to get to this section of the website, and then I think it's pretty straightforward from there. But of course, we will be available, either Kevin or I will be available over the next few weeks to answer any questions that you have as you're working through your submission. So just a couple other things, next steps and helpful tips here. So if you've got any other questions about any of the information that was shared today, we suggest you take a look at the kickoff event materials, especially the sample client file that was provided. Take a look at the grant agreement, and then the process guide, which is Exhibit C, located on our website. That's got a really nice summary of the required forms for each phase of this process. I also say don't wait until the last minute to assemble your documents. You know, we hope that this won't take a significant amount of time to assemble these, but if you're an agency that has received funding in the past, you're going to have more for us to select for client files, and so you're going to have more to submit, and that's going to take a little bit of time to pull those together. So again, our contact information, we've got our website is the best way, or excuse me, our email address, our general email address for Homeownership Capacity is the best way to reach us. That's on this slide here. I will be out of the office and then back in just before the due date, and then Kevin's out. But someone will be here checking that email inbox every day, with the exception of probably the 15th. We may have not so many people looking at that on that day, but otherwise someone will be available to answer your questions. And even if you need a call back, just send us an email through that, and we'll give you a call and work through it with you. So with that, that completes my portion of the presentation, but we'll take a second here to look at anything else that comes through in the question box here in the last couple minutes that we have. Haven't seen anything else come through yet, but give it another minute here. Henry, we see that you've asked another question here. We will reach out to you offline for the question. It looks like it's pretty specific to a client that you're working with, so we'll talk about that further offline. All right. Well, we don't see anything else we haven't seen anything else come through, so I think we'll go ahead and oh, excuse me. We do have one that just popped in. Should the general ledger include start of October 1 and go through the end of February? So yes, that would be true for any new organization, so newly funded in the 16-17 year. And the monitoring letter will include the date ranges that we're looking for. So, but yes, if you're an organization that was funded under the 16-17 program year, yes, you will have it provide the general ledger for October 1st, 2016 through February 28th, 2017. All right. Well, we're certainly available to answer any questions that you have. Thanks for taking the time today, and look for some email communication from us within the next few days. Thank you.